Monsters, Ed Gein versus Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Who got him right? Ed Gein is a name that you probably don't recognize, but trust me, you know who he is. Honestly, in addition to John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy, I'd say he's definitely one of the most famous serial killers of all time. So he's had 3 different movies made that were inspired by the story of his life and killings, plus the new season of Netflix's anthology series Monsters, which covers the lives and murders of various serial killers. But which is the most accurate? Let's dive into Ed's story, its retellings, and find out which one you should watch to get the most accurate look into his utterly disturbing string of murders. Ed Gein, better known as the Butcher of Plainfield, was an American serial killer from the 1950s. He was born in 1906, and his childhood was far from normal. His father was abusive, and his mother was a religious fanatic. It's often noted that his mother instilled within him a deeply rooted aversion to sex, as she would often tell him that it was evil and to engage in it would cause one to become contaminated. This probably explains why Ed's victims were almost all women. Ed's mother died in 1945 along with the rest of his family. It is not confirmed whether or not he was responsible for their death, but his brother's passing still remains a mystery, so it's not out of the question. Following their deaths, Ed went on a killing spree, taking the lives of at least 2 women. On December 8, 1954, Ed's first victim would be found dead. However, Ed's neighbors actually found him quite normal. It wasn't until 1957 that police discovered the body of Bernice Worden on Ed's property, and along with it, the remains of multiple other women, which led to his arrest. They found Bernice hanging in Ed's shed, decapitated and disemboweled with her sexual organs removed, which all but confirms the theory I mentioned earlier about the mother all but inspiring this type of bizarre behavior. In addition to these murders, Ed was convicted of exhuming corpses from a local cemetery and using the remains to create furniture and clothing. He used a skull as a soup bowl, crafted various human masks made from the faces of his victims, and a full-on human suit made from a woman's preserved remains. Despite these inhumanly insane acts, Ed denies ever engaging in necrophilia or cannibalism. After his arrest and trial, Ed spent the rest of his life in various psychiatric institutions, and he was deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. Then, in 1984, he passed away due to respiratory failure, leaving behind a story that would be told for decades to come. Let's dive into how each of the 4 retellings of Ed's story portrays his life, character, and murders. Was Ed's story the inspiration for perhaps the most famous horror movie of all time, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho? Interestingly enough, the new Netflix series Monsters includes a parallel plot surrounding the making of Psycho, suggesting that Hitchcock pulled direct inspiration from Ed's murders. After all, Ed's crimes actually went public around the same time Robert Bloch was writing the original 1959 novel, Psycho. What's weird is that both the author, Bloch, and the film adaptation's director, Hitchcock, have both denied drawing inspiration from Ed's life. However, I just have a hard time believing this. I mean, Bloch literally lived 35 miles away from Gein. Galaxy Press said that Bloch stated, "I discovered how closely the imaginary character I'd created resembled the real Ed Gein, both in overt act and apparent motivation." Furthermore, while he denies using Ed as a character reference, he did admit in 1991 that he was inspired by the circumstance of the killer, whatever that means. Okay, so what about Hitchcock's movie? Well, he too claims Ed was not used for inspiration. Hitchcock thanks the novel alone for the inspiration behind his movie, although Netflix suggests otherwise. According to Business Insider, Tony Lee Morrill is a Hitchcock historian, and he stated, "There is no historical record of Hitchcock ever reconstructing Ed Gein's house or walking Anthony Perkins through it, indicating that the series is best understood as a dramatic license, not history." Okay, so the film and novel aren't necessarily inspired by Ed, supposedly, but they did admit that the character has some serious similarities. Both Bates, the lead character in Psycho, and Ed are known for their intense relationships with their mother and being from very small towns. Bates also tried to preserve his mother's body after her passing, including dressing her up, and eventually developed a split personality called Mother. We already know that Ed had a fascination with corpses, so this isn't too much of a stretch. In fact, Ed actually kept his mother's bedroom as a shrine, rarely entering her room after her death. Unlike Hitchcock and Bloch, Silence of the Lambs author Thomas Harris admits to drawing inspiration for his lead character, Hannibal Lecter, from multiple serial killers, including Ted Bundy, Gary Heidnik, and Ed Gein, in particular his woman suit. In addition to his woman suit that Hannibal Lecter makes, both Ed and Hannibal were considered somewhat transgender. Although not transgender in the traditional sense, they were known to contribute to the deranged cross-dressing trope. In fact, Bates from Psycho was known for the same thing, further proving that Ed must have been some sort of inspiration for Bloch's novel. Other than these two prominent characteristics, there is no further correlation to Hannibal Lecter. In fact, while Hannibal is eerily calm and collected, Ed was known by his neighbors to be eccentric. Interestingly enough, Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre is 100% inspired by Ed Gein, no one else. Back when Hooper was 5 years old and living in the same state as the serial killer, he recalls his parents telling him the story of Ed. They didn't mention his name, but to me he was like a real boogeyman. Hooper would later reimagine this childhood fear as Leatherface, the youngest brother of the Sawyers, a cannibalistic family who lure passersby to their farmhouse to be killed and eventually eaten. Now, this is obviously not an accurate retelling of Ed's life. After all, he's denied engaging in cannibalistic activity, and truthfully, he'd have no reason to lie about that. However, just like Ed was notorious for his fashioning of human flesh into various items of clothing, Leatherface wears a mask of human skin, hence the name. So, aside from the killings and face mask, there aren't too many ties between this movie and Ed, just that Hooper was inspired to create it after hearing about the serial killer during his childhood. So now we get to the most recent retelling of Ed's horrifying story, Season 3 of Netflix's series Monsters. Ed is played by Charlie Hunnam, a seemingly normal man who would later become the Butcher of Plainfield, but is it accurate? Well, for one, the series pins Ed as the killer of his brother, although, as we already know, is far from confirmed. In the series, Henry, Ed's brother, admits he wants to move away and to leave his mother's overbearing presence behind. Angry with his brother's abandonment of the family, Ed hits his brother over the head with a block of wood and stages a brush fire. The series also claims that Ed dug up his mother's body. While he did later develop an obsession with exhuming grave sites, Ed never recovered his mother's body. However, the show is accurate in its depiction of Ed's skin suit, which he claimed was used to feel closer to his mother. Perhaps in reference to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Ed is shown using a chainsaw as his primary murder weapon in the Netflix series. Although this is not accurate to real life at all. Ed was known for using a .22 caliber rifle instead. The Netflix series also makes several changes to evidence regarding Ed's victims. For one, the series claims Ed was responsible for the disappearance of Victor Travis and Raymond Burgess, although their disappearance remained unsolved to this day. The series also depicts Ed as having a romantic sexual relationship with his second confirmed victim, Bernice Worden. But as we know, Ed was highly avoidant of sexual relationships thanks to his upbringing, making this fabricated relationship most likely completely false. In fact, the number of Ed's victims is also fabricated in the series, as he only has 2 confirmed victims in real life, while the series implies he had many, many more. Finally, perhaps the most outlandish addition to Ed's story is in Monsters Season 3 finale, where Ed helps the FBI track down serial killer Ted Bundy, providing them insight into his killings, and even giving them a letter from Bundy he received through a mutual friend. So now that we've broken down each and every one of the films, books, and TV shows inspired by Ed's story, which is the most accurate? Honestly, none of them. But I'd say Psycho isn't too far off, despite it being the only one whose creators deny pulling inspiration from Ed. But if you want a modern retelling of his story, I definitely recommend Netflix's series. Just know going into it that there's some serious additions and assumptions made throughout the story. What did you think of this Ed Gein deep dive? Which version of his story do you think is the most accurate? Do you think Bloch and Hitchcock were being honest about where they pulled their inspiration from? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more theories just like these. Thanks again for watching ScreenRant, and I'll see you in the next one.